A coal miner smears black dust across the minister's face, part ritual, part farewell. The minister has promised each of them 400 rubles, except that money is really just the price of their lives.
How many men do you have?
On this shift, 45 here, 100 in total.
I need all 100 men to gather their equipment and get on the trucks.
Do you? To where?
That's classified.
Chernobyl desperately needs a crew willing to dig a tunnel through ground contaminated with lethal radiation. The coal minister doesn't dare tell them the truth, terrified that if he does, no one will volunteer, so he tries threats first. But the foreman leading the group just looks at the armed soldiers standing nearby with open contempt.
Start shooting. You haven't got enough bullets for all of us. Kill as many as you can. Whoever's left, they'll beat the living piss out of each of you.
You can't talk to us like that.
Shut the fuck up. This is Tula. This is our mine. We don't leave unless we know why.
After a long, hesitant pause, the minister finally has no choice but to tell them the truth. The reactor is going to seep into the groundwater. The contamination will keep spreading, and people all over the world could end up dying from radiation exposure because of it.
Forever, they say. They want you to stop that from happening.
They're working-class men, but none of them are fools. They understand exactly what this means. They're being sent to die. But once they hear it could save hundreds of millions of lives, they don't say much of anything. They just glance around at each other, one last look between friends, as if reaching some silent, unspoken agreement, and set off without hesitation. This is arguably the most brutal thing ever done to this so-called nation of warriors, and yet almost by accident, it pushed them to the absolute peak of human courage. Each man stepping forward before leaving, pressing his blackened hand against the minister's clean suit in a final farewell, the handprints left behind standing as their last vow to humanity. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, inside a nuclear reactor in Soviet Ukraine, control rods weighing tons each began jerking violently up and down, completely out of control. Inspection staff spotted the anomaly and immediately hit the emergency shutdown button, but it did nothing. Every indicator light flared on at once, and reactor number 4, designed for a maximum output of 3,200 megawatts, surged to over 10 times that capacity within seconds. With a deafening explosion, the disaster that would soon grip the entire world had fully erupted. The reactor was torn apart, graphite core fragments scattered everywhere. Standing in that area for even a few minutes was enough to kill a person, but no one told the firefighters what they were actually walking into. Everyone assumed it was just an ordinary fire. They rushed in to fight the flames almost entirely without protective gear, and it didn't take long before something felt very wrong. One firefighter, curious, picked up a fragment off the ground, and the radiation instantly burned straight through his glove, searing his palm into raw, bloody flesh. Within minutes, firefighters began vomiting one after another, exposed skin blistering and burning, some collapsing unconscious on the spot. Even then, none of them retreated. They kept pushing forward, wave after wave. At the plant itself, the engineers were equally in the dark. A terrified young worker burst in, screaming that the core had exploded, and started vomiting before he could even finish the sentence. Deputy Chief Engineer Dyatlov flatly denied it, even though he'd already seen graphite fragments scattered on the ground with his own eyes, material that should have existed only inside the reactor's cooling system, never scattered out in the open like this. Even knowing full well the reactor had exploded, he kept sending people deeper inside to investigate anyway. The air already reeked of sharp, metallic fumes. Pandora's box had already been violently torn open in front of everyone, and yet people still believed this was just an ordinary day. Unaware of what was really happening, local residents gathered on a nearby bridge to admire the strange, beautiful glow in the distance. Moonlight spilled across the scene, a gentle breeze drifted through, young couples pushed strollers over to watch, and children laughed and played in the falling uranium snow. What none of them realized was that the glittering particles filling the air were actually extremely concentrated radioactive fallout, carried steadily toward the crowd by the shifting wind, exposing everyone there to lethal radiation with zero protection at all. That bridge later became known as the Bridge of Death, because not a single person who watched the glow that night survived.
It is beautiful.
The firefighters understood that if this fire wasn't extinguished in time, everything within a 100-mile radius would be reduced to nothing. Even sensing something was deeply wrong, they still chose to march forward toward near-certain death, all for the sake of the residents nearby. Meanwhile, the plant director arrived at the scene. Had Dyatlov told the truth in that moment, this disaster might never have spiraled into the catastrophe it became. But in the end, he lacked the courage to shoulder that responsibility.
Tell me what happened, quickly.
We ran the test exactly as Chief Engineer Famin approved. Unit Shift Chief Akimov and Engineer Toptonov Encountered technical difficulties leading to an accumulation of hydrogen in the control system tank.
What about radiation?
Obviously down here is nothing but in the reactor building, I'm being told. 3.6 Roentgen per hour.
Well, that's not great, but it's not horrifying.
Not only did he refuse to tell the truth, he shifted all the blame onto the chief engineer. While the group huddled together, strategizing how to dodge responsibility, the technicians inside the control room were facing an agonizing decision of their own.
Now we have to get water into the core, otherwise there'll be a meltdown. We have to open the valves. What do you want, Boris? If it's true, then we're dead. 1 million people are dead. Is that what you need to hear? We have to open the valves by hand.
By hand? And the number of valves, the amount of time to turn them, you're talking about hours in there.
Then help us.
Help you do what? Pump water into a ditch, there's nothing there.
They understood, with painful clarity, that just a handful of people couldn't undo what had already happened, and no one grasped better than they did just how catastrophic the radiation levels really were. But for the sake of their families, and for an entire city of residents, the two of them, carrying an unimaginable weight, rushed into the equipment room anyway.
Sorry.
There's nothing to be sorry for. I told you. We did nothing wrong.
But we did.
While they risked their lives trying to salvage whatever they could, the plant director was busy telling a sweeping lie to the officials who'd rushed to the scene, claiming this was nothing more than a minor malfunction, already resolved by the engineering team, and falsely insisting he'd received a call from Moscow instructing everyone present to keep quiet, to avoid triggering panic. Someone pushed back immediately, pointing out that on his way in, he'd personally witnessed dozens of workers vomiting and burned, and that the air itself seemed to glow with an eerie light. He urged evacuating the town before the toxic fallout spread any further. But Dyatlov kept insisting it was nothing more than a normal chemical reaction. In the middle of this heated dispute, the most senior official present finally spoke up.
No, the state tells us the situation here is not dangerous. Have faith, comrades. The state tells us it wants to prevent a panic. Listen well. We seal off the city. No one leaves. And cut the phone lines. Contain the spread of misinformation. That is how we keep the people from undermining the fruits of their own labor. Yes, comrades. We will all be rewarded for what we do here tonight.
Trusting the plant director's lie, he made the wrong call. A decision made in haste that not only cost the disaster its best window for containment, but effectively signed a death sentence for the entire surrounding town. After the meeting ended, a technician walked into the room and discovered that the radiation meter, with a maximum reading capacity of 1,000 Roentgens, had already been burned out from the very start, meaning the situation was far worse than anyone had dared to imagine. Despite Dyatlov's constant threats, he told the truth anyway.
I walked around the exterior of Building 4. I think there's graphite on the ground, in the rubble.
You didn't see graphite.
I did.
You didn't.
You didn't! Because it's not there!
Before he could even finish speaking, Dyatlov's body began showing signs of radiation sickness, and he collapsed to the floor. The plant director rushed to get him to a hospital. Meanwhile, the technician was sent to the rooftop to assess the actual condition of Unit 4, littered with graphite debris from the explosion. He only stood there for a few seconds before suffering severe burns. By that point, no instruments were even necessary. The reaction of the human body alone was enough to reveal just how catastrophic the radiation levels truly were. Lies, in the end, can never fully bury the truth. What makes it so infuriating is that Dyatlov's willful denial not only cost the disaster its best chance at containment, it also condemned this land to remain a forbidden zone for over 100 years. The firefighters who'd been kept in the dark, who could have taken proper precautions had they known, ended up paying for that lie with their lives. 31 of them died on the spot. Those with stronger constitutions endured a slower, more agonizing fate over the following weeks, their immune systems completely destroyed, their bodies breaking down cell by cell, suffering through pain beyond description, a fate worse than death itself. Heroes, and yet denied any dignified send-off. No ceremony, nothing. All that awaited them were cold lead coffins, sealed permanently in concrete, and the breathtaking glow that had lit up the night before had already dissolved into a haze, drifting on the wind toward the skies above the city. Meanwhile, in Moscow, top officials convened an emergency meeting. After reading through the fabricated report, the presiding official simply declared the incident already resolved, and some in the room even openly mocked the situation, dismissing it as overblown.
In terms of radiation, Plant Director Bricano reports no more than 3.6 Roentgen.
I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest x-ray, so if you're overdue for a checkup...
Fortunately, Valery Legasov, the Soviet Union's leading chemistry expert, happened to be present at that meeting. Based on nothing more than a few scattered clues, he immediately concluded the situation was far more serious than the report suggested. The reactor core itself had already exploded.
Mr. Legasov, there's no place for alarmist hysteria.
It's not alarmist if it's a fact.
Well, I don't hear any facts at all. All I hear is a man I don't know, engaging in conjecture.
Despite immense pressure from above, Legasov held firm to his conclusion. If left unchecked, the spreading radioactive particles would drift across the entire planet on the wind, becoming not just an unprecedented catastrophe in human history, but a permanent stain on the Soviet Union's legacy. He laid out his reasoning methodically and forcefully, and though it sounded alarmist to those in charge, they ultimately agreed to send Boris Sherbina to investigate the site alongside him. Throughout the journey, Legasov kept explaining his reasoning to Sherbina, who remained deeply skeptical the entire way, until their plane flew directly over the nuclear plant itself.
What have they done?
Can you see inside?
I don't have to. Look, that's graphite on the roof. The whole building's been blown open. The core's exposed.
I can't see how you can tell that from here.
Oh, for God's sakes. Look at that glow. That's radiation ionizing the air.
Well, if we can't see, we don't know. Get us directly over the building.
Boris,
don't use
we
my
fly
name.
directly over
I
it.
don't
The
see your
reactor will be
advice.
dead within a week. Dead!
Even knowing full well radiation levels had already exceeded safe thresholds, they still landed nearby. But even at this stage, the plant director and chief engineer continued trying every possible way to conceal the truth, not only claiming the situation was fully under control, but even producing a fabricated investigation report, attempting to pin the blame entirely on the overnight shift workers. Though Sherbina still hadn't fully come around to trusting Legasov, he wasn't blind to reason either. The conditions on the ground already made clear this was far from the simple story the director had spun. He dispatched a lid-lined armored vehicle to take radiation readings at the site, and even though everyone had already braced for the worst, the actual results still exceeded anyone's darkest expectations.
It's not 3 Röntgen. It's 15,000.
What does that number mean?
It means the core is open. It means the fire we're watching with our own eyes is giving off nearly twice the radiation released by the bomb in Hiroshima. And that's every single hour, hour after hour. 20 hours since the explosion, so 40 bombs worth by now. 48 more tomorrow, and it will not stop. Not in a week, not in a month. It will burn and spread its poison until the entire continent is dead.
Legasov hadn't been exaggerating at all. Over the past 20 hours, the temperature inside the fissioning reactor core had already exceeded 2,000 degrees. Continuing to douse it with water at this point would only accelerate the reactor's deterioration, and if the resulting radioactive wastewater seeped into the groundwater, it would contaminate water sources on a catastrophic global scale. The only viable solution left was to drop boron and sand from the air to smother the reactor. But Legasov had overlooked one critical, fatal detail. Radiation levels directly above reactor number 4 were so extreme they'd disable military equipment outright. Sure enough, the very first helicopter sent to drop material crashed almost immediately after losing control of its systems. But this sudden disaster didn't scare off the remaining pilots. Fully aware they were likely flying to their deaths, they kept attempting approaches from every possible angle. Despite everyone's desperate efforts, they were already too late. Dust laden with hazardous material had already drifted toward the town. In places no one could see, animals were dying in massive numbers, while the residents remained completely unaware. The rescue efforts seemed to be making steady progress, so much so that even Sherbina, at one point, began to believe Legasov had exaggerated the true scale of the disaster.
Professor Ilyin, who's also on the commission, says the radiation isn't high enough to evacuate.
Ilyin isn't a physicist.
Well, he's a medical doctor. If he says it's safe, it's safe.
Not if they stay here.
We're staying here.
Yes, we are. And we'll be dead in 5 years.
Legasov, meanwhile, remained eerily calm, because from the very moment he'd first seen the test results, he'd already prepared himself for the worst possible outcome. Sherbina was stunned to realize how little time he had left. He could never have imagined that after only a few hours here, his own life had already started counting down. Just as his thoughts spiraled, a phone call came in that confirmed, once and for all, that Legasov had been telling the truth all along. A nuclear power station far away in Sweden had detected radioactive dust in the air. An analysis showed it contained chemical particles matching Soviet nuclear fuel. Multiple regions around Kyiv were also reporting anomalies. Several countries bordering the Soviet Union had already banned their citizens from traveling into the region, and the United States had even captured satellite images of the site itself. There was no longer any way to conceal what had happened at Chernobyl. Only then did Soviet leadership finally grasp the true scale of the crisis, simultaneously admitting the nuclear leak to the world while beginning to evacuate residents. Ironically, the very official who'd originally ordered the news blackout turned out to be the first person to flee the area. Cars streamed out of the town one after another, and within moments, a place that had been bustling with life fell into complete, eerie silence. To this day, that region remains off-limits to human habitation. Just as Legasov thought he might finally get the chance to take real action, Ulana's arrival hit him like a blow to the chest. She had detected radioactive material the moment the explosion occurred, and had independently concluded from official reports that the core had exploded. The moment they met, she pointed out a fatal flaw in the current rescue plan. While covering the core with boron and sand would indeed put out the fire, the extreme residual heat would eventually melt the sand into molten lava, which would then burn straight through the plant's underground containment layer, catastrophically contaminating the groundwater below. Legasov was already aware of this risk himself. He'd assumed there was still time to address it, but he'd overlooked one crucial factor. The water used to fight the fire had already flooded the reservoir beneath the reactor. If molten lava reached that reservoir, the resulting steam would trigger a massive thermal explosion, and if the other 3 reactors were detonated as a result, everything within a 100-mile radius would be instantly obliterated. The radioactive material released would devastate all of Europe, and ripple outward to affect the entire planet's ecosystem. The only remaining solution was to send 3 plant workers directly into the facility to manually open the drainage valves, while another team raced to dig beneath the reactor and reinforce the containment layer. The problem was that this was precisely the epicenter of the leak. Radiation levels there were severe enough to kill a person almost instantly. Even the highest levels of Soviet leadership had no authority to simply order someone into a mission that was essentially a death sentence.
My friend was a security guard that night, and she's now dying. And we've all heard about the fireman. And now you want us to swim underneath a burning reactor. You even know how contaminated it is. But you can't even tell us that. Why should we do this? For what, 400 rubles?
You'll do it because it must be done. You'll do it because nobody else can. And if you don't, millions will die. And if you tell me that's not enough, I won't believe you. This is what has always set our people apart. 1,000 years of sacrifice in our veins, and every generation must know its own suffering. I spit on the people who did this, and I caused the price I have to pay. I'm making my peace with it. Now you make yours.
Sherbina's impassioned appeal stirred something in the people present. 3 men, Ananenko, Bespalov, and Baranov, stepped forward, one after another. Remember these 3 names because it was their willingness to sacrifice themselves that gave this global catastrophe its first real turning point. The extreme radiation instantly disabled every piece of equipment they carried. Yet despite the crushing physical and psychological toll, they pushed forward without hesitation. Time crawled by, and everyone waiting outside grew increasingly anxious. At one point, Legasov became convinced the 3 men had already died. If that were true, it would mean no one else could ever get close enough to the core again, and every plan that followed would become impossible. Just as everyone's hope began to fade completely, a knock came from inside. Watching the 3 men emerge successfully, everyone finally exhaled in relief, except Sherbina, who couldn't bring himself to feel any joy at all. By this point, he trusted Legasov completely, and all he could think about was what fate ultimately awaited these heroes.
The divers.
Divers, the firefighters, the men in the control room. What does the radiation do to them, precisely?
At the level some of them were exposed, ionizing radiation tears the cellular structure apart. Skin blisters, turns red, then black. And the cellular damage begins to manifest. The bone marrow dies. The immune system fails. The organs and soft tissue begin to decompose. The arteries and veins spill open like sieves, to the point where you can't even administer morphine for the pain, which is unimaginable. Within 3 days to 3 weeks, you're dead. That is what will happen to those boys.
It wasn't just these 3 young men. everyone involved in the decision-making, all of them, would eventually develop radiation-related illnesses too. It was only a matter of time. Just as everyone believed the reactor had finally been brought under control, Legasov discovered from the latest readings that the internal temperature was still climbing steadily. The concrete layer, already compromised by molten lava, would only continue deteriorating over time. They needed to dig down to the base of the reactor as quickly as possible and install a massive heat exchanger to cool it. But figuring out who would carry out this task became its own brutal problem. Even with the country's reputation for toughness, getting soldiers to dig a tunnel through in such a narrow window of time was never going to be easy. And so, this life-threatening task ultimately fell to the coal miners.
I need all 100 men to gather their equipment and get on the trucks.
Do you? To where?
That's classified.
Come on, man. Start shooting. You haven't got enough bullets for all of us. Kill as many as you can. Whoever's left, they'll beat the living piss out of each of you.
You can't talk to us like that.
Shut the fuck up. This is Tula. This is our mine. We don't leave unless we know why.
You're going to Chernobyl.
Ordinary, unarmed men, and yet completely unafraid of any authority that tried to threaten them into compliance. But the moment they learned their own lives could save tens of thousands of others, they set off without a second thought. Men of humble origin, who refused to trade their lives for money, who would never bow their heads to power, yet were entirely willing to step forward in their country's darkest hour. In that moment, something genuinely luminous in human nature shone through, standing in stark contrast to that suited, well-dressed coal minister, though in reality, that same minister was actually the very first man to lead the charge himself.
Now you look like the Minister of Coal.
Their assignment was to dig a 150-meter tunnel in the shortest time possible, and then carve out a 30 by 30-meter chamber at the base of the reactor to install the heat exchanger for cooling, all without any heavy machinery, entirely by hand.
We can start in the morning. No. We start now. I don't want my men here one more second than they need to be. If these worked, you'd be wearing them.
The deeper the tunnel went, the hotter it became, and even working stripped completely bare, the heat was nearly unbearable.
What's it up to?
50 degrees.
Fuck. We need fans.
For what purpose?
They dig your fucking tunnel, that's why. Who's talking to you?
Oh, comrades.
It's 50 degrees in there. We can't breathe without masks. We can't breathe with the masks. It's like a fucking oven. We need ventilation.
Fans will put dust in the air. The dust will go in your lungs.
I've been breathing dust in my lungs for 20 years.
Not this dust. I'm sorry, but for your own good, no fans.
Because of this, they inhaled massive quantities of hazardous dust, and of the men involved, millions at minimum, never lived past the age of 40. It was these very miners, risking everything without hesitation, who ultimately stopped this nuclear catastrophe from spiraling further. Yet fully eliminating the radiation from this site will still take another 800 years, and the damage caused by the fallout will linger for a full 100,000 years to come. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed, roughly 750,000 Soviet military personnel and civilians had taken part in the cleanup effort, and well over 100,000 of them died as a result. To prevent the radiation from spreading further, and to stop biological mutation, they culled every single animal within a 2,600-kilometer radius and cleared all vegetation within 100 kilometers. And the brave men who gave their lives in the process never received any real honor or recognition. Only the families who stood by their sides through those final, agonizing days truly understood just how much they suffered. While the cleanup effort pressed forward under immense strain, disposing of the scattered graphite fragments became a whole new crisis. With radiation levels reaching 15,000 roentgens per hour, standing near the debris for even 2 minutes, even in the most advanced protective suits available, was enough to be fatal. Sending people in to clear it by force would have amounted to nothing less than throwing away lives outright. Ultimately, Legasov proposed borrowing a lunar rover from the highest levels of government to handle the cleanup, one of the Soviet Union's most closely guarded pieces of advanced technology at the time. Watching the rover slowly roll into action, he smiled, for the first time in what felt like ages. But nobody could have predicted that even the lunar rover couldn't withstand radiation this extreme. What infuriated Sherbina even more was that Soviet leadership, representing the world's foremost superpower, would rather watch their own people die than swallow their pride and ask another nation for help.
The official position of the state is that a global nuclear catastrophe is not possible in the Soviet Union.
Once again, the burden fell back onto human shoulders. If the graphite wasn't cleared in time, workers wouldn't be able to install the protective shell over Unit 4, and the continuously spreading radiation would eventually impact nations across the globe, rendering every sacrifice made so far utterly meaningless. Left with no other option, they mobilized soldiers to finish the job, effectively sending them to trade their lives for the task. But by this point, there simply wasn't any alternative left. Even in full protective gear, no soldier was permitted to work for more than 90 seconds at a time.
It's time to go. After 90 seconds, I will ring a bell. When you hear it, return immediately. Drop your shovels in the bin and proceed down the hallway for decontamination. Above all, while on the roof, throw your debris over the rail. Do not look over the rail. Is that clear?
Under the general's orders, soldiers rushed onto the rooftop platform in waves. Regardless of how far along the work had gotten, the moment their time was up, they had to retreat immediately, replaced instantly by the next group to continue where they'd left off. This grueling cycle repeated over and over, until every last fragment of debris had been completely cleared. In places no machine on Earth could function, these men completed this death-defying mission, using nothing but their own flesh and blood, burning through their own lives to get it done. According to later records, these 3,828 brave men who took part in the cleanup collectively removed hundreds of tons of radioactive debris. Afterward, their efforts received almost no recognition or coverage, but their fate by that point was already written. Once the cleanup was finally complete, every piece of equipment used in the operation was permanently abandoned at Chernobyl, left there forever. The moment the sarcophagus was finally sealed shut marked the end of the rescue operation, and with it, the time had finally come to hold those responsible for all of this accountable.
We need to find out exactly what happened that night. Moment by moment, decision by decision. Go now while they're still alive. Talk to them, because if we don't find out how this happened, it will happen again.
It was Legasov's persistence, more than anything else, that gradually peeled back the truth behind the disaster, layer by layer. Reactor No. 4 had never actually passed its safety tests. The plant director, desperate to finish ahead of schedule and secure a promotion, had pressured the chief engineer relentlessly, and together they'd falsified a test report. Except one critical function had never actually been properly resolved, forcing them to keep operating at reduced power just to maintain external electricity supply. They knew full well this wasn't a sustainable solution, but driven by wishful thinking, they kept compounding one mistake with another.
3 years I've tried to finish this test. 3 years. I've just had a call from the grid controller in Kiev. He says we can't lower power any further, not for another 10 hours.
The grid controller? Where does he get off
It's not the grid controller's decision, Dyatlov. Someone's pushing down from above. Not that we'll ever know who. Running half power, we're not going to have stability issues.
It's safe. We'll maintain at 1600. I'll go home, get some sleep, come back tonight. We'll proceed then. I'll personally supervise the test.
Had they simply cancelled that fateful test, this disaster might never have happened at all. But instead, they made the single worst decision imaginable, the very first link in the chain reaction that would eventually detonate this catastrophe. What followed only grew more baffling, fully aware that many of the overnight staff were inexperienced interns, some not even properly trained on the equipment. They pressed forward with the test regardless.
I haven't reviewed it. We only just found out
There, review it. Or you can just do what I tell you. I think even you, stupid as you are, can manage that. Well, let's go.
Switch the turbine off while the reactor's still running. This is not good.
Shut the fuck up and do your job.
Under Dyatlov's stubborn insistence, they marched, step by step, toward the abyss. Following his direct orders, staff dropped Unit 4's output from 1,600 megawatts down to 700 almost instantly. The sudden drop triggered a chain reaction, output continuing to plummet uncontrollably, everything spiraling out of control. The core became poisoned with xenon gas, and Reactor No. 4 teetered on the brink of shutting down entirely. A senior engineer recommended halting the reactor completely and restarting it after a 24-hour cooldown. Had that plan been followed, the entire disaster might have taken a completely different turn, might never have happened at all. But once again, Dyatlov made the wrong call.
Raise the power.
No, I won't do it. It isn't safe.
Safety first. Always. See, if I say it's safe, and if the two of you disagree, then you don't have to work here, and you won't. You won't work anywhere ever again. I'll see to it. I think you know I will see to it. Raise the power.
Unable to defy his orders, the staff had no choice but to comply. To get the reactor operational again, engineers pulled out nearly every single control rod they had, and even then, output barely scraped past 200 megawatts, far below the 700 megawatt minimum required to run the test. Dyatlov, undeterred, insisted on proceeding with the test immediately anyway, and it was this single, catastrophic order that sealed everyone's fate. The control rods inside the reactor began shaking violently. The water circulation pipes shrieked with a deafening roar, and even the computer system flashed shutdown warnings. Yet Dyatlov ignored all of it. With the control rods no longer able to regulate output, reactor power surged uncontrollably within seconds. Meanwhile, those massive control rods, each weighing tons, jerked violently up and down. Staff rushed toward the control room, desperate to stop what was unfolding. But it was already too late. The moment an engineer slammed the emergency shutdown button, every indicator light in the control room lit up simultaneously. Reactor number 4, originally rated for 3,200 megawatts, had surged past 33,000 megawatts. From that point forward, nothing could be undone. This was the full sequence of events leading to the disaster, but it still wasn't the complete truth, because that night, not a single person in the control room realized that the emergency shutdown button itself, due to a critical design flaw, effectively functioned as a detonator. How could a button meant to prevent disaster instead become the very trigger that unleashed it? At this point, Legasov fell silent, because continuing meant tearing away. In front of the entire world, the last remaining shred of the Soviet Union's carefully constructed facade.
What are you waiting for, Legasov? Tell your lies.
Comrade Dyatlov, you will not be warned again.
Or what? For God's sake, Legasov's already given it away. He said before,
Comrade
there was
Dyatlov.
no way to avoid what was coming. He knows something.
Comrade Dyatlov.
She knows something.
Dyatlov's testimony left everyone in the room stunned into silence. Just as Legasov was preparing to reveal the rest of the truth, the judge and several officials present tried to cut him off, attempting to adjourn the proceedings before he could finish. That's when Sherbina stepped forward. As the highest-ranking official present, he staked everything he had, his career, his safety, his standing, to grant Legasov permission to keep speaking. It turned out the emergency shutdown system carried a fatal design flaw. The control rod tips, which should have been made of boron to slow the nuclear reaction, had instead been fitted with graphite tips to cut costs. Graphite that actually accelerated the reaction instead of suppressing it. Even worse, these reactors lacked any proper containment structure at all, and relied on ordinary water for cooling instead of specialized coolant. These severely substandard support systems were the true root cause of the disaster. Even without Dyatlov's catastrophic decisions that night, some other unforeseen factor, or even a natural disaster, could have triggered the exact same outcome. And there were 16 more reactors of this exact same design scattered across the Soviet Union. A full decade earlier, one of Legasov's own colleagues had already identified this design flaw, only for Soviet authorities to bury the finding entirely, even destroying the technical documentation related to the graphite design. If this problem wasn't confronted head-on immediately, every remaining reactor risked becoming the next Chernobyl. And if multiple reactors failed simultaneously at some point in the future, it wouldn't just be the Soviet Union at stake, but the entire planet. This is precisely why Legasov, at tremendous personal risk, chose to lay out the full truth in front of everyone present, regardless of the consequences. Even so, he never truly managed to get Soviet leadership to take his warnings seriously. No one was willing to publicly acknowledge what he'd revealed. Then, on April 26, 1988, exactly 2 years to the day since the Chernobyl disaster, Legasov recorded extensive evidence onto a set of audio tapes, and shortly after, ended his own life. This scientist, who poured everything he had into the Chernobyl crisis and saved countless lives in the process, ultimately awakened the entire Soviet Union through his own self-sacrifice. The government finally acknowledged the reactor's design flaws and moved to reinforce every remaining reactor of the same type. Yet the damage caused by Chernobyl runs deep, and many still believe this disaster played a role in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union itself. Even today, people continue working to correct the mistakes made all those years ago. This series recreates that entire history with near-documentary precision, and even through a screen, the suffocating weight of it all comes through vividly. The Chernobyl disaster itself is beyond dispute. Though naturally, given differing perspectives, the show carries its own subtle biases here and there. But the real danger of a lie was never mistaking it for the truth once. It's what happens when people hear that lie repeated so often. They eventually lose the ability to recognize truth at all. Still, no matter how you look at it, the Soviet Union genuinely mobilized nearly 500,000 people, using their very lives to contain this disaster. Every person who fought to uncover the truth, who carried out these impossible orders, stands as a hero to all of humanity. Without these ordinary working-class people, the fate of the entire world might have been irrevocably altered from the very moment that reactor exploded in 1986. It was they who, bare-chested and with quiet dignity, waded through this catastrophic failure of human judgment and came out the other side. That's the story for today. If there's a movie you'd like to see covered, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more great content.